So hello, everybody. It's great to see so many people here, some new names as well as long-known members. Hi, everybody. Oh, more people coming in. Let me just admit those. So I'm here today with Sophie Hannah, which I'm very excited about because, as a lot of you know, on the Goldster Book Club, I'm a big fan of crime fiction, and they don't get much better than Sophie Hannah. So here I've got some of her books here. I'm going to show you some of her latest ones. And then this one, which I'm so nearly at the end of, but luckily we can't give any spoilers. Brilliant. Cannot recommend it enough. So Sophie, welcome to Goldster. It's absolutely brilliant to have you here. Thank you so much for coming along because, wow, you're busy. I mean, I look at your schedule and I can't believe you've even got time to come and talk to us today. So, so tell us, how did you actually get into writing in the first place? Did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I always wrote, which is a slightly different thing. So from early childhood, writing was my main hobby, and it was kind of more than a hobby. I was passionate about it from a very young age. And then all the way through school and college and university, I was equally passionate about it, kept writing. And I kind of knew that I always wanted to have writing as like the most important, serious pursuit in my life and the thing I was most ambitious about. But at the same time, it never occurred to me that it would ever be like what I officially did. I always just assumed that I would have to have a job that paid the bills. And in fact, I deliberately, when I was at university, strategized about how to get an easy, boring job that would pay, enough money to live on, but that wouldn't demand any thought outside of working hours. Because I thought, this is how my life's going to be. I'm going to be always pursuing my writing. And I did think, I might get published and I want to keep trying and I want to, publish loads of books. But it just never occurred to me to pursue it as a career, which actually I'm really pleased about, because what that meant was it had to get to the point where my writing was unambiguously bringing in more money than my day job before I kind of woke up and went, maybe this is trying to tell me something. So yeah, always took it seriously, always passionate about it, but it just never occurred to me to try and pursue it as a way of making money specifically.
And was crime writing always the thing, or did you kind of just fall into it? Were you a big fan of crime fiction? Did you read it when you were younger, or was it just something that came to you later?
No, it was always crime fiction. From the minute I discovered Enid Blyton's Secret 7 books.
Totally, exactly the same.
Yeah. I absolutely knew that crime was my favorite kind of thing to write, that I thought it was the best thing. I remember reading a Secret 7 Enid Blyton book and thinking, this story is so much better than any story that isn't driven by a mystery and the desire to solve it. So yeah, I was hooked on crime very, very young. Crime fiction, not real crime.
It wasn't your time inside that made you want to write?
No.
So when did you first become a fan of Agatha Christie? Because I'm just going to show everybody this. This is your latest and is fourth Poirot novel, isn't that right? So how on earth did that come about? How did you become the person that the Agatha Christie Foundation chose to write the new Poirot books?
Well, I have to say it wasn't my idea. I would never have thought of it in a million years. My agent was in a meeting at HarperCollins, and he knew that HarperCollins were Agatha's publishers, and he knew that I was a big Agatha Christie fan, and he just suggested in the middle of this meeting, which was about something completely different, he said, hey, you guys publish Agatha Christie, and she's been dead for a long time, and I've got this author who's a huge fan. You should commission her to write new Poirot or Miss Marple or something. And in that meeting, when he suggested it, he was told, absolutely not, the family would never hear of such a thing. But as it turned out, at that exact moment, the Christie family were thinking about commissioning a new Poirot novel.
Fantastic. What serendipity.
Yeah, pure serendipity. I mean, just the most massive coincidence, basically.
Yeah. So what's it been like trying to, because presumably, as you said, you're a huge fan of hers, trying to follow in the footsteps of somebody who's just such a presence internationally? And did you have to change your writing style a lot to do it?
I mean, I had to write a book that was convincing for a book that's supposedly written in 1929. So in that sense, I had to, not write in a contemporary register. But I never felt, well, I never set out to copy Agatha Christie's style. I don't believe one writer can or should copy the prose style of another. What I set out to do was write the best possible books that I could, starring Agatha Christie's Poirot exactly as she created him. So I tried to create a mystery that Poirot fans would love. I tried to make sure that my approach to storytelling followed all of Agatha's kind of basic blueprint for how to tell a great story. But I never tried to write in her style. But I did try to write convincingly as a late 20s, early 30s voice.
And how did you start researching that? What did you do to try and get into that mindset and look at what was happening then?
I basically just reread Agatha's novels written in that period. I reread all the Poirot novels written in the 20s and 30s, and I rewatched all the David Suchet adaptations, which I love. And that kind of just immersed me in the feel of her fiction at that time. And that was it. That was all I did. And the only other thing I did was whenever I come to write a Poirot novel, as I go along writing it, there's quite a bit of Googling that has to be done. Usually in relation to, did such and such exist in 1930, for example?
Yes, exactly.
When you write a contemporary novel, you don't have to research whether anything exists because you know what exists now. But if you're writing a historical novel, there was so many things that I had to look up to see if they existed in the period that I wanted to put the books in.
Sometimes it's amazing to discover how early something was invented or how late. You think, gosh, was that really not around then? Or how did they already have that? I find that really fascinating about doing historical research because there's often some real surprises there.
Yeah.
Has there been anything like that that's really made you change a plot or anything that you've come across and thought,
well, my second Poirot novel, there's a character in it who has various kidney related issues. And I was absolutely confident that kidney transplant was something that could happen or not happen, but be discussed in the book. And I have a friend in Cambridge where I live who is one of the leading kidney medicine specialists in the UK. So I arranged to meet with him to ask him all about the history of kidney transplant. He told me the first one was in 1952. So I said, could there have been a very early, not very well reported on attempt in 1930? He was like, no, definitely not. So that plot had to change a bit, but it never matters. You know, when there's a plot point that has to change, you can always think of a way around it that still achieves your plot aims.
Yeah.
So it was fine. The kidney plot went in, but just slightly differently.
Yeah. And have you got any plans to write Miss Marple? Because you've done a few Poirots now.
No, but I have plans to read New Miss Marple because HarperCollins have very recently commissioned a collection of new Miss Marple stories, 12 of them by famous and up-and-coming crime.
Oh, brilliant.
So Ellie Griffiths is going to be in it, and Ruth Ware and Val McDermott and lots of other
fantastic. We'll have to look out for that.
Contributing stories. Yes, I'm so excited about reading it. It's coming out, I think it's coming out in September this year, but there are going to be bound proofs in March, and I just cannot wait to get.
Oh, that sounds exciting. We might have to get someone from HarperCollins on to talk about that because I know we've got a lot of crime fiction.
Probably get some of the writers on to talk about.
Well, Ellie Griffiths is going to come back at some point. She was one of our first guests, so she's going to come back in soon, talking about the new Ruth Galloway, obviously, but not. But now I know we're going to talk to her about that as well. So, do tell us about your very latest book, which isn't a Poirot. So this one, The Couple at the Table, which I can thoroughly recommend. This is so good. Without giving any spoilers, obviously, tell us about this one and how it came about and your process of when you plot a new book.
Okay, well, I had the idea for The Couple at the Table when I was supposed to be starting to write a completely different book. And I was realizing that I just didn't feel like writing the book I was meant to be writing. And it was because this other new idea had popped into my mind and was agitating to be paid attention to. And I think several things made it pop into my mind. One was I had just reread Death on the Nile. and realised how brilliant it was. Until that point, it hadn't been one of my very favourite Agatha Christie's. As soon as I started to reread it in late 2020, I thought this is an absolute work of genius. So now it is in my top 5 Agatha Christie's. And I realised that Death on the Nile is about a very kind of high octane and quite poisonous love triangle. That's what, you know, is at the heart of it. And that's the part of it that I really love. I mean, I love the ingenious plot, but I love that dynamic of Simon and Jackie and Lynette and all of the people. And at the time that I was rereading Death on the Nile, and I was rereading it because I knew a movie was going to be released, a new movie, which has now just come out. In fact, I went to see it, the press preview last week. But originally it was scheduled to be released in early 2021. So I was rereading Death on the Nile because of that. And it was really echoing, my reread of Death on the Nile was echoing and chiming in with stuff that was going on in my personal life at the time, which was that 3 good friends of mine were involved in a poisonous love triangle. Basically, one of my friend's husbands was having an ill-advised affair with one of my other friends. And although none of this was anything to do with me, there was a concerted attempt to drag me into it. Anyway, all of this led to one of my friends, you know, the friend who was basically going off with the other friend's husband, ended up writing me a really vicious 3-page poison pen letter.
Oh my goodness.
And posting it through my letterbox. Basically, she was cross that I wasn't totally taking her side.
Did they not know they were going to end up in a novel? I mean, they do know what your job is.
I have no idea. Well, actually, the novel, The Couple at the Table, is the characters in it are not based on those real characters, but the psychology, I mean, the main character of The Couple at the Table is Lucy, whose ex-husband and a very close friend of hers both betrayed her and went off together, which would be upsetting enough anyway, but they did it in a particularly callous and terrible way, as in fact did these 2 people that I knew. And so Lucy is just like feeling so betrayed and thinking they're absolutely terrible. And then somebody else murders her love rival. So this friend who betrayed her and went off with her husband, who is now married to her husband on honeymoon with her husband. And this awful woman, Jane, gets murdered on her honeymoon. And Lucy is kind of the main character in the book. And she's like, if anyone was going to murder Jane, I'm the only person I can think of who would have done it. And I know I didn't do it. So who on earth did it? So Lucy, all through the book, is struggling with, you know, there's the betrayal and the terrible things they did to her, but there's also the curiosity, like, who is this other person? Why do they hate Jane? She didn't go off with their husband. So that's part of the engine for the mystery. So all of these things came together, and I decided I wanted to write a contemporary kind of locked room mystery with a hint and a nod to Death on the Nile. So the plot, the dynamics, the solution to the mystery is completely different from Death on the Nile. But what's the same is that there's this couple on their honeymoon, also on the honeymoon at the same resort. Well, not on the honeymoon, but also present at the same resort is Lucy, the ex-wife, with her new partner, Pete. And they claim that they had no idea that William and Jane were going to go there on their honeymoon. And this is a huge coincidence. On the second day of the honeymoon, Jane gets an anonymous letter pushed through her door. And again, that was totally inspired by my horrible ex-friend sending me a poison pen letter. But Jane gets this anonymous letter pushed through her door, and it says in capital letters, "Beware of the couple at the table nearest to yours." And Jane has no idea what this means. She's completely baffled. Luckily, she doesn't have to be baffled for very long, because later that day she's murdered and put out of her
Luckily.
mystery. Luckily for her, yes. Her puzzlement ends when she's murdered. But the way in which it's a locked room mystery, and it's not technically a room, then it's not that everyone's locked in a room, but they are all at the resort together. And the police soon established that nobody could possibly have got in from outside the resort to commit this crime. So
there's a locked resort murder.
Locked resort mystery, exactly. And the police think, okay, this narrows it down a lot because it's got to be one of the 8 people who were there on the night that Jane was murdered. But then as their investigations continue, it seems as though nobody in the resort could have done it either. For each person, there is a absolutely cast iron reason why they could not possibly have done it. And all of these reasons seem as equally solid as all the other reasons. So at that point, the police realise they know precisely nothing, because if they think they've proved that no one inside could have done it and no one outside could have done it either, then basically that translates as they've established nothing at all, because somebody definitely did do it, because Jane definitely did get murdered. So even though the story is very different from Death on the Nile in all its particulars, I wanted it to kind of be a nod to that sort of poisonous love triangle, betrayal, sort of ingenious puzzle mystery. So in a way, The Couple at the Table is it's the most golden age puzzle-like in structure of all my contemporary crime novels.
How do you go about plotting this? I mean, what's the first thing you do? When you said this book, you weren't meant to be writing this one. It came to you. How do you start getting it down on paper? And by the way, everybody, do remember that you can, although you're muted, you can write something into the chat. So if you've got any questions for Sophie, please do feel free to put them into the chat. So yeah, how do you start? What's your process?
Well, now, let me just rewind a bit. So one of the things I do, as well as writing, I do 2 other things. I teach crime and thriller writing at Cambridge University. We have a master's degree in crime and thriller writing, and I created that, and I'm the course director and the main teacher on that course. And another thing I do is I run a coaching program for writers, or anyone who wants to write, anyone who's always wanted to write a novel and thinks they probably can't. They're completely wrong about that. And I have this program called Dream Author, in which I basically take anyone who enrolls, find out what they want to achieve, and help them to achieve it. I help writers to create success, whatever that looks like to them in terms of writing.
And I'm just putting going to put your website in the chat in a moment, so people can look this up as well, Sophie. Yes.
Okay, great. So in both of those places, Cambridge University and in my Dream Author program, I actually teach a particular approach to novel planning and plotting. I teach this method, which has been the method I've evolved over the years, and now I use it religiously. And it's called the gnocchi method. I made up that silly name for it. Like, this is not an official formal thing, but I called it the gnocchi method for various bizarre reasons. Now, I'll tell you a tiny bit about it now, but to explain precisely why it's as powerful and good and effective as it is, and I mean, it is a real game changer. People I introduce it to, I would say 90% of them come back to me and go, that's amazing. Like, that has transformed my writing practice. And in order to get the full benefit from it, you need all the bump. So if anyone would like, you don't have to do my master's program or join Dream Author, but if you would like to receive just the material about the gnocchi method, I'm happy to send you that for free. So just email sophie@sophiehannah.com and put gnocchi in the subject line, and it could just be an empty message.
In the chat.
Sophie@sophiehannah.com with gnocchi in the subject line. But if you think you're interested in it, please then do listen to and read what I send you, because if you try and do the gnocchi method without knowing the full sort of thing about why it works so well, it's just not as good. But I'm happy to send it to anybody who wants it. So in brief, the gnocchi method is an approach to planning where what you end up with at the end of it is a plan that is so detailed that effectively you know the book as well as if you'd written a first draft. And I realized that I would finish, somebody says they'd love to hear the bizarre reason. Okay, I will tell you the bizarre reason because it's relevant to what I'm about to say. I realized that when I finished my gnocchi plans, which in those days I just used to call them my plans, and then I'd think, right, got the plan all sorted, it's immensely detailed, now I'll start writing the first draft. And I would start writing the first draft and it wouldn't feel anything like starting a first draft. And I realized at a certain point that my plan was, because of the approach I'd taken when doing the plan, it was a kind of first draft, but not a conventional one. So it's a kind of first draft. It's also a kind of plan, but also not a conventional plan because it's much more of a first draft than most plans are. And the reason I called it the gnocchi method is that gnocchi, the food, is kind of partly potato and also partly pasta. I was very suspicious of gnocchi, the food, for a long time. When I was like, come on, I don't believe it. I mean, what is this? What is this anarchy? And then I got the gnocchi and I was like, actually, it tastes quite nice. So just as gnocchi, the food, is half potato, half pasta, my gnocchi method, if you do a gnocchi draft or a gnocchi plan, what you end up with is a first draft of sorts and the most detailed plan you can possibly imagine. And that is brilliant for so many reasons. And that's why if you email me and ask for the gnocchi details, I will send you the podcast episode that I recorded for Within My Dream Author program. And it explains in great detail why the gnocchi method is so beneficial. It's not just that doing a plan is helpful because then you know what you're going to write. It's so much more than that. So you have to get the full effect. But anyway, that's how I do it. And a lot of people think they don't like planning or they wouldn't like planning because once you've done the plan, then all the creative decisions are made and then writing it might be a chore if you know where you're going. I have found the opposite is true for me, the absolute opposite. If I'm writing, or I mean, I never do anymore, but when I used to write trying to work out the plot at the same time, I was always worried about the plot not being sorted, and any kind of worry or stress hampers our creativity. So if I've got my brilliantly detailed plan, then firstly, I've been creative in creating that. And I like to call that phase story architecture. If you call it planning, you immediately feel like you're in a boring local council meeting. But if you call it story architecture, I mean, only to yourself, obviously, because you don't want anyone to think you're pretentious, but I have no problem being pretentious in my own head. So then you do all that creative stuff, and then you edit it, you make sure the story and the structure is as you want it to be. Then when you start writing, your brain is relaxed because your brain's like, oh, we know what we're doing here. We just have to make these things happen and write as well as possible. And the more relaxed your brain is, the more your imagination and your creativity will pop up. Just like, we have our best ideas when we're washing up or walking the dog or something. If your brain thinks it's got a plan, it's like, here's everything that needs to happen in the book, it's immediately going to start going, yeah, but what if this? But what if that? I know it says in the plan that we're going to go to Scunthorpe, but what if instead we went to Devon? And, just all these ideas for changes pop up. Now, then we've got a choice. We can stick to our plan if we want to, for reasons that we like, or if we find this new exciting idea really compelling, we can sub it in and go, I'm changing the plan. After all, no one knows it exists apart from me. I am the boss of this plan. And if I want to change an aspect of it, then I will. So it works brilliantly for me, I have to say. And
that's fantastic. And you're going to get a lot of emails with gnocchi in the title after this session.
I always do. And I'm happy to send it out because it's quite funny. Quite often in my Dream Author program, I basically am available to coach anyone who needs coaching that's in the program whenever they need it. And so very often I'll get...
Tell us about the Dream Author. Sorry to interrupt. Tell us what it involves.
I'll finish this and tell you about Dream Author. So I'll very often get emails from anxious authors who have just found out about a new method to write, and they'll be like, have you heard of the save the cat approach to writing a book? What do you think of it? Should I be doing that? I'm not doing that. Should I panic? And I'm like, don't panic. I've never heard of Save the Cat. So I've never heard of any of these approaches that my dream authors bring to me.
Yeah.
I always look them up, always, because I always think, look, if someone's got a better way to write a book, I want to know about it. And I always look at them and go, this is nowhere near as good as writing a gnocchi. This is just not as good as the gnocchi method, because as far as I've discovered, I mean, there could be a brilliant way that I haven't discovered yet, but all the ways that I have discovered so far that other people are promoting of writing a book are telling you precisely how to structure your plot, like the 3-act structure, the save the cat structure. And that's very prescriptive. It might work brilliantly for some ideas, whereas the gnocchi method doesn't dictate any particular approach to structuring other than the gnocchi method itself. And the gnocchi method, if you just follow that, you discover the best way to structure your book, sometimes by trial and error, rather than thinking, you know, I have to fit into this very fixed formula.
Sometimes it's too formulaic. We have a really lovely comment here from Lucy. She says, I just finished a gnocchi draft for a children's chapter book, and it's been really useful. It takes the pressure off so much, and it also really helps if you have short segments of time to focus on your writing, which I know is lots of us, as it's much easier to pick up your thread again. So there you are, somebody who's used it, tried and tested, who's actually singing your praises. Now, before we get on to Dream Author, actually, someone's asked a question about Crime Fest. Do you have just said and Crime Fest? So are you doing Crime Fest this year?
Not doing it this year. Okay. They may be referring to, I have done Crime Fest before. I'm pretty sure I haven't done it since I formalized the gnocchi method. So I don't think,
okay.
They may mean the Harrogate Crime Festival. Mm-hmm. I'm going to the Harrogate Crime Festival this year.
Oh, great. So what date will you be there?
I will be there on, I'm just going to look at my schedule. There it is. There it is.
So great. These things are all happening again. I just got back from the Dubai Lit Fest, and it was so lovely having real audiences, being in the green room with other authors, you know, instead of doing it all on Zoom. And obviously I love Zoom because we do so much, you know, Goldster's wonderful on Zoom, but to meet people in person after so long is fantastic. Leslie says she saw you at Bristol Crime Fest a few years ago.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And I've done Bristol a lot. I'm at Harrogate on the 22nd of July, which is a Friday at 12 noon. I'm on a panel called Dead Men Talking. I suspect that panel is about writing in the you know, continuation novels for famous dead writers. I'm often asked to talk about that.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you. So tell us about the Dream Author program. How did you come up with this, and what does it involve?
Well, so I came up with it because several things happened all at once. One was that I realized that almost wherever I go, I meet writers. If I go and do panels, if I go to festivals, if I go and do things on the crime scene circuit, then I meet other crime writers. But also at all of my author events, and this was 2019, so I was going about doing hundreds of events. I was on the road a lot. And at most of my events, after the event was finished, while I was signing books, 1 or 2 people would always come up to me and say something like, I've always wanted to write. Can you give me any advice? Or I've got a chapter of a book and then I didn't have the confidence to finish. Or I've got a book that I haven't sent to any publishers because I'm worried I'm too old and they wouldn't be interested. So I was meeting and talking to lots of writers or people who wanted to write, and I was meeting and talking to people at every possible different stage. So I was meeting top 10 Sunday Times and New York Times bestselling authors, and I was meeting, you know, married women with children who didn't feel they had the right to write when they should be looking after their children. So they'd written like a page and then given up because they felt so guilty that they were... every possible person and relationship to writing, I felt like I was meeting and giving advice to. And as you can tell, I've got a big gob, so I'll give advice to anyone who asks for it. Anyway, what I realized was most of these writers, whether they were hugely successful or just starting out, were creating unnecessary suffering for themselves by believing things that weren't true about their situation. They thought they were true. We all think that it's true that we can't possibly succeed because whatever, Or even though we've sold millions of books, we're not really a true success because we haven't won the Booker Prize. Or if we've won the Booker Prize, we're not really a success because Hilary Mantel's won it more often than we have. You know, most writers will find a way to make themselves feel terrible about their writing. And most people who care about writing have big dreams and ambitions and hopes in relation to writing. But the combination of powerful dreams or ambitions and telling yourself a terrible story about why it's never going to work, that results in just unhappiness and frustration. So everywhere I was going, I was encountering this. Now, at the same time, because I've always been interested in self-help and psychology, in 2018, I published a self-help book called How to Hold a Grudge, which is briefly about how
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, holding grudges in the right way is actually very beneficial to us. So that's what that was about. So I've always had this interest in that sort of thing. And I was a member of I still am a member of a coaching program where I was the client. I and many other people were clients, and there was a coach, and we would get coached on whatever was going on for us. It wasn't writing related, it was just general life stuff. And it made such a huge difference to me in my life. And meanwhile, I'm helping all these writers. I've been teaching writing for however many years. And I suddenly thought, what I'm a member of as a client, this is what writers need. They need not just courses on how to write a bestseller and not just courses like the one I teach at Cambridge on how to write great crime fiction, but they need psychological and emotional support and guidance on how to pursue their writing dreams in a way that will actually create happiness and success rather than frustration and failure. And as soon as I'd had the idea, I thought, I have to do this. I have to do this. It just felt like it became my number one passion project. So I spent a few months putting it together, and then I launched it, and it just took off straight away. And what's so lovely about it is, you know, people join and they do it for like sometimes even as little as a week and sometimes as little as a month. But almost everyone who joins writes to me eventually and says, this is amazing. Like, now I know what I want to aim for. I know how to do it in a way that might actually work. So it's just like really transformative in exactly the way that I hoped it would be, and in exactly the way that the program I'm a member of has been for me. But that was where it came from, because there just wasn't anything like that for writers. And in Dream Author, I take a very particular approach, which comes from the coaching world rather than the writing world. So in the writing world, normally, if you see a service that says mentoring for writers, it generally just means like helping writers pitch to agents and approach publishers, but it's not the sort of absolutely transformative stuff of looking at the stories we're believing and then looking at the facts and seeing the vast gulf between the stories we're telling ourselves and the truth. And what once writers can see, you know, I've had so many dream authors say to me, like one woman joined and she said, well, I've got this idea that I think is brilliant and I would love to write it as a book, but I'm 74. What publisher could possibly be interested in publishing someone at 74? And I said, if the idea is great, if the book is great, they will be interested. So then she told me the idea and it was amazing. I was like, that could be huge, but she didn't believe it could. So in the end, I said to her, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you some thoughts to practice for the next 2 weeks and see how you feel at the end of the 2 weeks. And the thought I gave her to practice was, I don't believe this book could be huge, but Sophie does. Because you've got to, when you're trying to encourage someone to ditch a false belief and adopt a new, truer one that's actually going to be better for them and create better results, it doesn't work if the thought you tell them to think is one they don't believe. So if I said to my dream authors, I want you all to think every day, I'm going to be more successful than Lee Child, it's not going to have any effect on anything if you don't believe it. And most people wouldn't be able to believe that. So it's taking the most positive plausible thought and getting them to focus on that. So I knew that this dream author would make some headway, or I hoped she'd make some headway if she practiced thinking that. So after 2 weeks, I said, okay, how have you got on thinking for 2 weeks? I don't believe this book could be huge, but Sophie does. She said, well, it's funny. She said, I still don't believe it could be huge because it's me and I'm 74, but I have really impressed upon myself over the past 2 weeks that you really do disagree with me and you really do think it could be huge. And I guess you know as much about these things as I do. So maybe you're right and I'm wrong. Who knows? And that, just getting her to that point was enough for me to go, okay, well, look, let's take that maybe and think, is that maybe worth you writing a couple of chapters, mate? Is it enough of a maybe that you're willing to... Anyway, long story short, I'd had to do lots of coaching with her, but she ended up writing that book and getting her agent set up an auction, and there was a preempt offer, which is when a publisher says, I'm offering so much money that you have to shut down the auction. There was a preempt offer of 400 grand.
Wow, that's amazing.
For that book, which if I hadn't said to spend 2 weeks practicing this thought,
Yeah.
she would never have agreed, because her starting point was, when she first joined Dream Author, she was like, well, I mean, I'm not willing to write a book that might get rejected, and I know that it would get rejected. So now in that situation, right, instead of saying, well, why have you joined a coaching program? Like, that's not gonna do any good. So with each client, like, I love the challenge of thinking, okay, what's going to work for this person? And I knew that for her, because she was so wedded to the idea that it couldn't work, I knew that I had to tread really gently. So all I did at first was to ask her to keep reminding herself that my thoughts were different from hers. And I've used that one again, because that's often the way in.
Yeah.
You just keep going, well, okay, you think that, I think this. And you don't even say, like, I knew that I was as likely to be right as her. In fact, I thought I was much more likely to be right because I knew this book could be huge. But there's no point saying that. So I just got her to focus on the fact that I think this. And then eventually she came up with the, oh, what if she's right and I'm wrong? But if I'd told her that there was a good chance I was right and she was wrong, she would have resisted it. So there's a lot involved in it, but I love it. And what I love most is that, like, everybody, apart from one guy who really didn't want to be coached and really didn't want to be helped, but almost everybody who joins Dream Author, the results they get start getting so much better, not only in terms of their writing achievements, but the way they feel about everything. And
we've got a ringing endorsement here. I joined the Dream Author program in August 2021. This is not from me, by the way, this is someone in the chat. I joined the Dream Author program in August 2021, and it's absolutely fantastic. It has really changed my approach to how I think about writing and life in general. It has definitely changed my life for the better, and I would highly recommend it. It really has been transformative. So fantastic.
thank you.
We've also got a query. Would the gnocchi method work for short story writing too?
It would. It works for short story writing, it works for play or screenplay writing, and it works for non-fiction. It works for almost everything. I mean, I guess if you wanted to write a haiku, you might not really need to do a gnocchi, but anything, you know, even more than like anything with stages and components. And in fact, I don't think I would have come up with the first element of the gnocchi method, because before I called it the gnocchi method, I called it just my planning method. And I created that planning method. I don't think I would have created that planning method if I hadn't been involved in writing a play many years ago for a youth theatre. I was asked to write a play for Bracknell Youth Theatre, which was based at this art centre called South Hill Park. And I was like writer in residence there for a month. And my job was to write a play for these young people to perform. And the director who was going to be directing the play told me that he wanted me to do it in the form of a scene by scene breakdown. And so I did that for the play. And then when I started writing novels, I was like, actually novels have scenes. So in my gnocchi plans, I don't just have a section for each chapter, I have a section for each scene within the chapter. just really get it down to its constituent parts as much as possible. So yeah, absolutely. Does the Dream Author program offer any concessional charges? I'm not sure what if that means discounts. It doesn't, but I have tried to keep it very affordable. The pricing is as low as it can be for, in my opinion, for people to take it seriously as an investment, but also feel it's really good value. So it's £600 for a 14-month program, and at some point in the 14 months, most people say, you know, you could charge 10 grand for this. And I always say, like, I know, I agree it is worth a lot more than I'm charging, but I want, a lot of people who want to write don't have 10 grand to spare. So I've kept it as affordable as possible, and resist.
I put the link to that in the chat, so anybody can follow that link to find out more about the Dream Author program.
The reason there aren't any sort of discount, what there are sometimes is special offers. So you can join on the home page of Dream Author at the bottom. There's a thing where you can sign up to join the mailing list, and sometimes there is like a special offer period. So that's worth doing if you think you might want to join at some point.
So you mentioned earlier your book, How to Hold a Grudge from Resentment to Contentment, the Power of Grudges to Transform Your Life. And you've talked a little bit about that one, but the other one I really wanted to ask you about was Happiness, a Mystery. Could you explain to the Goldster members the concept of this book and why you wrote it?
The concept of the book is basically approaching happiness as a mystery. Most people think they're not as happy as they'd like to be. They try and make themselves happier. Sometimes their attempts to make themselves happier work for a bit or don't work at all. But people aren't really agreed about what happiness even is and why we're looking for it and whether we should be searching for it. So I wanted to write another self-help book after How to Hold a Grudge. And I wanted it to be around the theme of happiness because I was aware that, so as I'd had lots of coaching myself and was kind of developing my thoughts about, you know, what's the best possible way to create happiness and success and all of that, I started to realize that actually trying to be happier than human beings can realistically be is a major source of unhappiness and a completely unnecessary one. So that's touched on in the book in quite a lot of detail. I mean, a lot of our unhappiness comes from the idea that we should be happier than we are, but that's not true. Like I find it makes me much happier to think if I'm feeling really fed up and a bit crap on a particular day, the minute I say to myself, well, that's fine. This is clearly how I should be feeling. Today's obviously just a feeling crap day and that's fine. Might not be fun, but it's fine. The minute you do that, then half your unhappiness is gone. A lot of our unhappiness is created by this idea that we should be happier and we're doing life wrong. But in fact, if you're a human being, life is never 100% happiness and delight. There's always some anger, boredom, frustration as well. We just can't avoid it.
No, and I think that the problem is, you know, people look at Instagram or whatever and think that everybody is living a great life, but you just have to, you know, obviously all know that they're only putting those very carefully curated moments on Instagram, and probably the rest of their life is dull or sad or just, you know, not particularly exciting. But we're so used to kind of looking at that and thinking, oh, everyone's having a much better time than me.
I actually think a great life, well, I know a great life involves some negative feeling as well. I would not think I was having a great life if I never felt angry, sad, frustrated, bored, envious, you know, whatever, all the negative feelings, you know, that is part of having a great life. It's feeling all the feelings, not just trying to limit your emotional range to something that's not realistic. And even if you could achieve it, it wouldn't be worth anything, because it would be, if it was just happy, 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 happiness wouldn't have any positive effect on us. It's like one of the things I say to my dream authors in webinars that we have these sort of coaching calls. And one of the things I regularly say is, when you go to Tesco to buy some milk and you open the fridge and you get out a litre of semi-skim milk and then you go to the till and pay for it, how often do you stop and celebrate that? How often do you go home and go, right, I'm opening a bottle of pink champagne because I successfully bought some milk? We just take for granted that we can buy milk and we don't count it as a success because it's so easy and it's just milk's just there all the time and anyone can buy milk who's got like a quid. So it's the same with happiness and writing success. It means something because of the contrast and the fact that we've failed on the way and the fact that sometimes we haven't succeeded. So the success becomes meaningful, and we wouldn't want happiness and success to be our experience all the time, because if it was, we wouldn't even know what happiness and success felt like because there'd be nothing to contrast them with.
So I have one last question I want to ask you, but before we get to that, I'm just going to tell people what is coming up on the Goldster Book Club. So just say that next week, I am going to be talking to two amazing authors, both very different from each other. On Thursday at midday, I'm going to be talking to Anne Seba. For those of you who haven't heard of her, she's a brilliant biographer. Her most recent biography is of Ethel Rosenberg. She's also written biographies of Wallis Simpson, which is superb. It's called That Woman. It's such a good biography. Various biographies of other people, including Jenny Churchill, Winston Churchill's mother. She's a really consummate author, and come along and hear, because even if you haven't heard her name, I bet you've seen some of her books. And then on Friday, I'm talking to another excellent author and speaker, Damien Labat, whose book, The Crossing Places, that's Ellie Griffith's book, The Stopping Places, get this right, The Stopping Places, a journey through Gypsy Britain. And he's a fantastic, very mesmerizing speaker. He came along when I was teaching on the Avon Foundation course as our guest speaker, and he's just brilliant with the way he talks about his life. So if you've got any questions for either of those, of course, as always, you can put them in the chat. And then the following week, Humphrey is back with Lena Sisko, the ex-Navy interrogator in Guantanamo Bay, who's written a book called You're Lying. And then Humphrey's back with the book of the month on Friday, The Hunt for Red October by Tom Clancy. So do come along to that. Now, on next week, I've also got my PPG, Purpose, Passion, Grit. As some of you know, this is our new Goldster venture. And this time I will be talking to Pete Langman, who is a musician, an author, a cricketer, who does all this while trying to cope with his diagnosis of early onset Parkinson's disease. And he's going to be talking about how that has an impact on his life. And just for those of you who don't know, because Sophie, in fact, asked me at the beginning about Goldster, obviously the book club is open to everybody at the moment, but for those of you who aren't Goldster members, we have 352 classes a month in things like yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, cookery, nutrition, mindfulness, reflexology, trying to think of all the other things we do, language classes, all sorts of things for mind, body, and spirit. So take a look at the website, the main Goldster website, and see what else there is on there. So to come back to you, Sophie, I just wanted to say, you began as a poet. So how did that begin? What was that journey like, changing from being a poet? You were taught at GCSE level, I believe, in schools. I don't know if you're taught at universities as well, as a poet, and then you suddenly had this new incarnation as a writer of novels.
I've always been equally interested in poetry and mystery stories from childhood. You know, it was always rhyming, metrical poetry and mystery stories, and I always wanted to write both. And I did start writing both and carry on writing both as a teenager. And it just so happened that my poetry was of a publishable standard sooner than my fiction was. So at exactly the same time that my poetry was starting to get published in magazines, and a small press offered to do a collection, and then a big poetry publisher offered to do a book. And while all that was happening and going really well on the poetry front, I was getting dozens of rejections for my novels that I was writing and sending out to all the publishers in London. And so I just thought, clearly it's working with the poetry in a way that it isn't yet working with the fiction. So I decided to concentrate on the poetry, and that worked really well for about 10 years. And then when I had my first baby, I had an idea that was just very compelling for something I wanted to write. And I realized that that something had to be a psychological thriller, because I had an idea for a plot involving a woman who is convinced that her baby is not her baby and has been swapped for another baby. And that became my first crime novel, Little Face. And I remember thinking, when I had the idea, I remember thinking, but I'm a poet now. I haven't tried to write crime for a long time. Maybe I shouldn't start trying again. And I thought to myself, right, I'm so keen on this idea. I'm going to have one last try at writing a crime novel. And if that doesn't work, then I might accept that I'm not meant to be a crime writer.
Well, I'm very glad you did have that try.
And
thank you for doing that.
That became my first published crime novel, Little Face, which, you know, my agent sent it to 8 publishers, all in the first round of submissions. 7 of them rejected it. The 8th one, which was Hodder, loved it. And I've been with Hodder ever since. And Little Face was it started slowly. It wasn't a big acquisition. I got a small advance and it just took off.
Brilliant.
No one understood how. Word of mouth, good reviews. It just took off and soon became, you know, it was selling all over the world and being an international bestseller. It was a bestseller here. I'm still earning significant royalties from it, a book that was published in 2006. Excellent. And that was what kickstarted the rest. But in my heart, I have always been a crime writer and a poet. And actually, although I don't write much poetry anymore, I have recently written 2 murder mystery musicals, one of which is about to be made into a movie.
Excellent. So what's it called?
It's called The Mystery of Mr. E.
We shall all look out for this. When's it being made into a film?
The filming is happening from August to November this year. And then it'll probably, because there'll be editing and I think it's going to go to some film festivals. So general release probably won't be till 2024.
Right, gosh, it's a long time.
And writing the lyrics for the songs is kind of what my poetry instincts are going into at the moment.
Oh, that must be so fun. Excellent. Well, we've had some really great comments here. So Geeta says, really interesting. Thank you, Sophie and Lucinda. And Emma says, it's nice to have someone encourage embracing our sometimes negative feelings. It's human to do so, unlike what some motivational speakers advocate for. They encourage masking negativity. And we have another comment that says, as usual, an excellent session, though, with so much extra positivity, motivation and encouragement. Many thanks. So thank you very much, Sophie Hannah. You've been a really brilliant interviewee. Well, and thank you for coming along. I do hope you'll come and talk to us when your film comes out. That would be fantastic.
I would love to, yes.
Thank you, everybody, for coming along today. And do come and check out the rest of our Goldster events. And Book Club and PPG are open to everybody at the moment. And as I say, check out all the other classes as well. So I shall see you next week on Tuesday, Thursday and Friday. That's making up for my time off being away for 10 days with Humphrey, doing everything while I was away. Thank you for all your lovely messages and take care, everybody. And I will see you next Tuesday for PPG and then Thursday and Friday for Book Club. And there's a little poll that's come up onto your screens. So I am now going to turn off my screen and I will see you all next week. Sophie, thank you so much. That was just wonderful.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.